Franklin is releasing two new shapes for their C45 paddle, the elongated Dynasty and the wide-body Tempo. Now that the C45 is offered in three shapes, literally every one of their pros are playing with it, including JW and Georgia Johnson, Hayden Patricklin, Paris Todd, and several others. Did the pros switch just because the C45 is better than the older Franklins and they're getting paid to, or is the C45 one of the best paddles on the market? Let's dig in and find out. Quick heads up, Franklin sent me these paddles to test, but there were no strings attached, no payment, no preview, and no input on this video. If you do use my affiliate code, I earn a commission, which does help support this channel and for future reviews. Let's start with the paddle specs and tech. I reviewed the hybrid shape back in March, and these new shapes are a welcome addition to the C45 line. I'll focus on the newly released shapes here, so the Dynasty and Tempo. So if you want more details on that hybrid shape and a deep dive into the general C45 technology, go check out that video. I'll link to it in the description. These paddles retail for $230, and you can knock 10% off that with the code JohnQ at checkout right on Franklin's website. Or if you'd rather buy from Pickleball Central, you can get the same discount with the affiliate link in the description. The Dynasty is Franklin's elongated shape with a longer handle, while the Tempo is a wide body with a shorter handle. I'll throw the specs up on the screen so you can pause if needed. These are my own measurements, so they might differ a bit from what Franklin lists on their website. And one surprise here, both of the 16mm paddles I received are actually lighter than their 14mm equivalents. All of these are dual certified with USAP and UPAA stamps, so you're covered for any sanctioned tournament. And they've passed rigorous testing at both labs, including the new break-in testing at UPAA. I covered the C45 construction in my detailed review of the hybrid shape, but here's the quick version. Franklin designed this paddle mostly to reduce break-in, that issue where Gen 3 paddles typically get way too hot over time. So now take a look at the x-ray. You'll see a dual foam edge wall that runs along the top and sides. There's a firmer outer foam band around the entire edge and a softer inner foam in between the edge foam and honeycomb core, but only along the top and sides. When I dissected the hybrid version, the plan view confirmed this. You've got a polypropylene honeycomb center with that firmer yellow outer foam all the way around, even into the handle, and the softer white foam on just the top and the sides. The setup is similar to what Yola used in their propulsion core, but with one difference. In Yola's mod paddle, the honeycomb cells are crushed flat. In Franklin's C45, they still hold their octagonal shape, which is a good sign for durability. The cell walls are also upright in profile, not bowed or accordion-like, which shows the core hasn't been overly compressed. Franklin also uses a two-step thermoforming process. So first, they treat a large slab with low heat and pressure, then they cut out the paddle shapes, then they machine out the foam cavities, insert the foam, and mold the final paddle. Last tech bit here, so the carbon fiber layup. Most paddles use a 0-90, 0 degree orientation, so Franklin went instead with a 45-0-45 degree, giving this C45 its name, and it softens the feel and adds flex. So alongside my usual metrics, I analyzed the paddle ball collision with all the C45 paddles using a ball cannon to measure something I call KewCOR. It's my way of objectifying and measuring firepower, similar to USAP's PBCOR and UPAA's PEF, which they use to regulate paddle power. But before we get into these results, let's look at the usual performance metrics, so spin, power, pop, maneuverability, and sweet spot. On the radar chart, high values on the left mean more firepower, high values on the right reflect better control and forgiveness, and along the bottom you get a sense of maneuverability and hand speed. Starting with the C45 Dynasty 14mm, it scores above average in both power and pop. It doesn't compete with the most powerful of paddles, but it's got some heat. Spin is solid at 2115 RPM, and twist weight is average for an elongated paddle. Swing weight is on the lighter side for this shape, and the balance point is right around average. Overall, it leans power without being overpowered, it has decent control, and it offers decent hand speed. And here's what the thicker 16mm version of the Dynasty C45 looks like. Compared to the 14mm, it has slightly less power and pop, and a lower twist weight, which suggests a smaller sweet spot. and that's unusual. Usually, thicker paddles have more power and better sweet spots, but this flips the script. And this is probably due to the odd static weights where the 14mm came in actually heavier than the 16mm. Now let's check out the tempo. The 14mm version shows a very different profile, so less power, more pop, and a slightly wider sweet spot. It's also fast in the hand based on its ultra-low swing weight and low balance point. And here's the 16mm tempo. Pretty similar to the 14, but just like the Dynasty shapes, the thicker version is a little softer. So overall, the Dynasty shapes lean power, the Tempo shapes lean control, and the 14mm versions have a bit more pop and punch than the 16s. So I also tested all three paddles using a ball cannon to produce a metric I'm calling KewCOR as a way to measure power based on energy return. Here's what I found. The C45 Dynasty 14mm came in at 0.493, the Dynasty 16mm at 0.475, the C45 Tempo 14mm came in at 0.483, and the C45 Tempo 16mm also at 0.483. So this places the C45 Dynasty 14mm low in the power category and all the others in the all-court category below that, which matches the radar gun data. And if you want to dig into the numbers, I've made interactive dashboards for both KewCOR and the radar charts. You'll find that link in the description. So before I got injured, I spent a good amount of time with these paddles and formed my own impressions, but I also wanted to bring in Eddie's thoughts because he's been using the C45 as his main paddle for the past few weeks.
Yep, I've tried all three of these Franklin C45 shapes, and my favorite by far is this Dynasty shape in 14mm. It has all the forgiveness I need, a little bit more power than the others, which is, frankly, for me, a really nice combination. This paddle has about 25 hours in it for me, so I've got quite a bit of experience with it, and it's doing everything I'm asking for. It drives, third shot drops, dinking. This is a very nice paddle that can do it all. I would say across the board on these three shapes, the sweet spot is excellent. You know, normally in a paddle like this, you tend to see a kind of a narrow sweet spot, but perhaps elongated vertically. With this Franklin, I don't see that. I see a very wide sweet spot. Spin, I would say, is average to above average. There is a bit of a pocketing feel on this paddle, some dwell time that contributes to spin. The surface at this point on my paddle is fairly smooth, and even the stock paddle, I would say, is not the grittiest out there.
So as far as my impressions, right away I noticed that the new Dynasty and Tempo shapes are much easier to play with stock compared to the hybrid. That one was just so light it felt like the ball was pushing it around. These new shapes feel more solid out of the box, so you don't need to add much, if any, perimeter weight. I'll talk more about the mods in a minute. Like Eddie, my favorite is the Dynasty 14mm. It packs solid firepower without sacrificing too much control, and the sweet spot felt bigger than the numbers suggest. I'd say the power level of this 14mm Dynasty is close to my usual paddle, so the 11624 Vapor power, so this transition to the Dynasty was easy for me. The 16mm Dynasty feels a bit softer, but it doesn't have the same pop, and I felt the sweet spot was slightly smaller. And that's not what I expected because the 16mm version, the thicker versions of most paddles, typically have larger sweet spots. The Tempo shape has less power, but still good pop. My only gripe was the 5-inch handle. It made two-handed backhands tough. So impact feel with the ball is crisp. You stay connected to the ball without getting harsh vibrations. And there's just enough dwell to control your shots, but it doesn't feel mushy. And the sound has that deeper Gen 3 tone we're seeing more of these days. So let's talk paddle mods. Unlike the hybrid, which really needs added weight, these new shapes play well stock. That said, the 16mm versions of both the Dynasty and the Tempo benefit the most from some perimeter weighting. For the Dynasty, I recommend placing the weight a little lower, starting around the neck and going up to around 8 and 4 o'clock. That helps balance out its naturally higher swing weight and prevents it from feeling too head heavy. For the Tempo, go a little bit higher on the paddle, centering the weight at 9 and 3 since it starts with a lower balance point. And overall, they're light enough out of the box that you've got room to experiment without overdoing it. All right, final thoughts. Franklin's C45 line definitely earns a spot among top-tier performance paddles. It covers the area from all-court over to entry-level power paddles. And across the board, these paddles strike a great balance, so they have plenty of pop and decent power, but with more control than you'd expect. The sweet spots are generous and spin is solid. Now, there is a lot of pop, so if you're coming from a more control-focused paddle, it might take a little adjustment. But once you get it dialed in, it is really consistent. The Tempo shape, in my opinion, is more niche, so it's better for players who love fast hands, who don't use two hands, and who prefer a shorter handle. The Dynasty 14 mil, though, will likely be the most popular. It's the most powerful in the line, but the control is still very manageable. And what stood out the most to me was how consistent these paddles are across every shot. So dinks, resets, drives, hands battles, you name it. The paddle won't do the work for you, but it gives you predictable feedback. And when I missed, I knew it was me and not the gear. If there's one thing I'd change, it'd be a more aggressive surface texture. The spin on these is fine, but with a bit more grit, I think these paddles would really unlock with even more potential. So as always with these Gen 3 foam-enhanced paddles, let's talk durability. I was really cautious in my hybrid review for the C45, but now that we're 3 months out, I'm feeling more confident. I haven't seen the same break-in issues that have plagued other Gen 3 paddles. There is a slight mellowing in sound and a small bump in power, but nothing dramatic or unmanageable. These feel like they're built to last, comparable to the 11624 Power series in that regard. And looks-wise, they are slick paddles. I do like the look of the matte metallic edge guards, although heads up, that finish can wear off with use.
You know, when I put on my lead tape, I like to do a little bit of alcohol just to clean things up. And I noticed when I swabbed the side of this, a ton of paint came off with the alcohol swab, and I've never seen that before. And you can see here on the edge, you know, I'm not a paddle dragger, but this is showing some blue coming through. Also on this brand new Franklin paddle, there's a bit of a rattle, which again, it's not going to degrade performance, but it's just one of those quality things that you might be looking for.
So a friend of ours actually uses this clear automotive vinyl tape to protect his. I haven't tested this myself, so I'm not sure how it impacts swing weight, but I'll drop a link in the description if you're curious. At $229 retail, you can knock it down to $207 with the code JohnQ at checkout right on Franklin's website, or use the affiliate link for the same deal at Pickleball Central. And Franklin backs these with a 1-year warranty, which is double what most brands offer. So here's the bottom line. The C45 is a premium paddle for players who want a balanced blend of power, control, and consistency. It won't hit like the hardest power paddles, but it's also predictable, steady, and built to perform. All right, that's it again for this video. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.